Clap if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Clap. Okay, here we go. We're a little late, but we're starting out talking about Ralph Maud, because I first ran into him, I think, in the late 80s when he was trying to track down Gene Radoslavich Kaiser, because he was trying to track down these books that Charles Olson had owned. And he came to me and he said, how can I find her? And I said, here's how you find her. And we talked, and he actually bought some books from me, and of course that made me love him immediately. But what I really loved more than that was the nuttiness of this idea to gather these books that Charles Olson had read or touched or had penetrated his mind somehow, but yet I never really got what this thing was about. I mean, it just seemed like a nutty idea to me until a couple of years ago, Andre Spears started referring to it as a kind of art, as a kind of conceptual art. And then that opened up into all the other things that a collection like this could be and could bring. And it just, then I understood what was going on with this collection. And then I thought, oh great, we'll go get it and we'll bring it back. And I thought that the great monument of this thing would be driving Charles Olson's sources across America, me in this truck with Charles Olson stuff. But it wasn't that at all. The real journey didn't start until we started unpacking those books and we saw what that array of sources was and meant and represented to this community. It's a community asset, but it's also potentially a great scholarly academic asset. And man, it's here in this community where Ralph wanted it, where Charles lived and worked. So I'm all done. Who's next? Andre Spears.
So I'm going to read this just for the sake of moving quickly. My understanding is that Ralph was very moved to know, shortly before dying, that the Ralph Maud collection of Charles Olson's books had found a home in Gloucester under the custodianship of the Gloucester Writers' Center. Insofar as his spirit is here with us now, I believe his spirit is rejoicing. On that note, I would like to dedicate a poem from Olson's Maximus 456 to Ralph's memory, In the Harbor. I don't know if Ralph had this poem in mind when he gave one of his own books the title, Charles Olson at the Harbor. In any event, the poem from 1962 is signed Charles Olson, dated Friday, November 23rd, and marked number 1. The reference is to 4 buoys that Olson could see from his window at 28 Fort Square. The buoys are of 2 types, so-called can buoys and dun buoys. I see them as buoys that any of us might behold looking out on the water from Maximus's mythopoetic perspective, say from the windows of the Maud Olson Library. It's a poem that suggests that the will to change for Olson, when he writes in the Kingfishers that what does not change is the will to change, can also be taken as the will to live in the present moment. In other words, as the epic challenge of cohering in what Olson describes as the human universe. I offer it as a reminder that the Maud Olson Library is not the outcome or the result or the end of a process, but a monument to process itself. As such, I hope and trust that it will continue to draw people together in mysterious and spectacular ways. In the Harbor, Can 9, Nun 8, Nun 10, Can 11. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. And on the Vancouver side of this whole thing, because we were in Gloucester and there was this equal thing out there that we needed help with. John Faulise felicitated the whole movement of the library to Gloucester. So, John Faulise.
I'd like to share two pieces with you, a short remembrance about what it was like to walk into Ralph's office for the first time, and a letter of endorsement for his collection of the books Olson owned and read. Ralph unlocked the door and we stepped into the flat that he used as an office. There were books everywhere. Every inch of wall space was lined with shelves, crammed with books, and there were freestanding bookcases wedged here and there, shelves stuffed with books and papers. Boxes of books and papers were stacked all over the floor, and the center of the room was filled by a long table that was completely covered with more books and papers, an island of books floating in a sea of books. The table itself seemed to be held up by yet more stacks of books piled underneath it, like unsteady Greek columns. In front of a chair was a study area, and it too was layered with books, both opened and closed, pages propped open with pencils and pens, and loose pages of paper with hastily scribbled notes. There wasn't a square inch of tabletop visible. This was Ralph's reading room, his collection of the books that will become Olson's reconstructed library. I had the opportunity to work with him there, and it was a marvel to see him command those volumes to yield the information he was hunting for without any guide except his own mastery of this seemingly endless domain of knowledge. The wonder is not just the vast scope of Olson's reading, but that he could then use the energy he took from it to push poetry into the postmodern. He read what other poets were not reading. He pushed back into the archaic and forward into physics and philosophy, and when the reading worked, the poems came. I'd now like to read an excerpt from a letter written by the poet Robert Creeley. I have just learned of Professor Ralph Maud's interest in establishing a place for his impressive Charles Olson collection, which has been in every sense a singular achievement of his own authority. You will know of his exceptional value to contemporary Olson scholarship, as well as his long-established ties to all of us, including Olson, during his lifetime. Therefore, it would be indeed fitting were a commitment to the appropriate housing and overseeing of the materials Professor Maud has accumulated might now be made. I do hope it proves possible to accommodate his Charles Olson collection, making thus another decisive location for scholars and poets to find their interests recognized. If I can be of any assistance with respect to this matter, please depend on it. Sincerely, Robert Creeley, Distinguished Professor, State University of New York at Buffalo. It's a pleasure to stand here tonight and be able to say, Robert, we have found that home for Ralph's Charles Olson collection. Thank you.